if humor is a skill and it means that it can be learned, then the question isn't actually, are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you? Or what kind of funny do you want to be? And so what we found in our research is that there's not just one way to be funny or to have more humor in your life. There's actually 7 primary, what we call personas, of how people tend to express their humor.
I saw that on your website, I think, of Humor That Works, where you can do the quiz.
Exactly, yeah. You can take a quiz. Yep. It's like 2.5, 3 minutes long, and you answer like 16 questions, and it'll tell you what your primary persona is. Okay. Because of these 7, you can learn all 7. That's what we encourage long term. But there's probably 1 or 2 of them that you do naturally. And so, yeah, you can go to the website, take the quiz, or you can kind of listen. I can give you kind of a high-level description of each one, and then probably with those, you can identify like, oh, I do that with this person, I do this with another person, etc. So the first persona that we often talk about is that of the enthusiast. And that is someone who simply is like finds joy in everyday life in every aspect. They're the person who is like constantly cracking up. They constantly seek out kind of funny stuff to watch on, YouTube, or they're going on Netflix and they watch stand-up comedians. Or they're the person that like you'll be sitting at a restaurant and they'll like just start laughing out of nowhere. And you're like, what are you laughing at? And they'll be like, oh, I was just looking over there and this guy's face like kind of looked like, these 2 people were perfectly lined up. So it looked like he was kind of like a bird or what. And you're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, I don't know. I just thought it was funny. Right. They're the people that like find humor in even the smallest moments or details. Right. So that's what we call the enthusiast. Then we have the next one is what we call the curator. The curator is someone who takes things that they find funny. If they find, if they come across a funny meme, that they send it to their friends, right? If they're watching Instagram reels and stuff like that, and then they're like, oh, I like that. So-and-so would like that as well.
That sounds like my girlfriend, actually.
Right? Exactly, right? So it sounds like a person that you maybe know. They become curators. Curators are a phenomenal persona to have because you're sharing more humor out in the world without you being the funny person. Like if you're that introverted person that's like, I could never get up and stand up and tell people a joke. Well, curator is great because you can say, well, this thing is already proven to be funny. It's got a ton of likes on Instagram, or it's got a ton of upvotes on Reddit, or whatever it happens to be. There's social proof that this is an engaging piece of content. Well, now I can share that with other people. Now, and that builds relationships, right? Like if someone sends you something that really makes you laugh or smile, it's kind of like, oh, wow, they get me. 1, they were thinking of me. And 2, they know me enough to remember that I love milkshakes. And so they sent me this like funny meme about, milkshakes. So curator is another great one. It's one of the more common ones that we see because people are like, it's relatively easy to do. Up next, you have the inventor. This is one that's a lot less common because the inventor is someone who like sits down and writes. It's the person that's like, maybe they're not really funny conversationally with their friends, but then when they post something on Facebook, it's really funny. Or when they write an email, it might be really interesting. Or they like writing poetry, or they do, write kind of just jokes and stuff like that, or they'll write out stories. So it's very much about that kind of like sit down, more kind of like very kind of intentionally write humor. It's something that not as many people do. People that do journaling, and if they journal a lot, and if they're intentional about like, hey, what's the humor that I find, and kind of can I craft that into a story, etc., those are inventors as well. After the inventors, the other one that is somewhat common, but people are scared by it, is what we call the entertainer. The entertainer is someone's very good at the presenting of information, where it's like they're the person where it's like when they tell a story, it doesn't matter, even if it's like a trip to the grocery store, you're like captured by what they're saying. You're just like I don't know, like there's just a way that they speak. It's fun. Even if it's not a great story, the way they tell it is so compelling. Yeah. That's typically what we think of when we think of like someone who is quote unquote funny, is that entertainer, that person that could get up on stage and make an entire room full of people laugh. And that's only one component of being an entertainer, but it's also only one of these 7 personas, right? If you're intimidated by that idea and you're like, I'm not that naturally funny person, well, great. There's other personas as well. After that, we've got the engineer. The engineer is kind of like my initial persona, and it's the person who is like using humor intentionally to solve a problem, where it's less like, oh, what's something funny to say, and more of like, oh, I'm going to use humor at the beginning of this presentation so that people are listening, and then I can tell them the project managed status update that I need to give. Or I'm going to listen to a funny podcast on my way home at work. not just because I enjoy it, because I know it's going to help me relieve stress so that I'm more, I shake off kind of the rust of the day, and then I'm more present for my daughter when I get home.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot more intention behind why I'm using that humor.
Yeah.
Then we have the advocate. The advocate is someone who's really good at putting, creating the space for other people to be funny or to share humor. So it's maybe the person kind of a little bit behind the scenes in the group of friends that's like always organizing fun activities, where they're not necessarily like the life of the party type person, but they're like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we all like went and, I don't know, played laser tag, or we all went, anyone want to go bowling this weekend? They're like, where they don't have to be that funny, but they've created the space for other people to jump in. Or they're the ones when other people are talking where it's like, wait a second, what were you saying? Like they're the people that we as introverts really like, where like if you start to say something and then you like get sidetracked, you're never gonna be like, well, I guess I'll never tell that story. But they're the ones that like have been listening and be like, wait a second, I think they wanted to say something. And so it's like they bring it. So they're really thinking about other people and how to make them look really good. And then finally, the last persona is a skeptic. And the skeptic is someone who is like really kind of balances what's appropriate, not appropriate. Skepticism too far is kind of like just the curmudgeon, just that person that's like never laughing at all. And it's like, work is supposed to feel like work, or like doesn't find anything funny, etc. Like, so that can be taken too far, but it can be a good persona in different moments. And so as I'm saying those, my guess is like you maybe think of different people, right? You said, oh, curator, that sounds like a girlfriend. Or as you're listening, are any of those things that you do, or any of those ones that you're like, oh, maybe sometimes I'm an entertainer. I can tell stories. I mean, I host a podcast, so in some ways you're an advocate because you're getting people, giving people space. But any others that have resonate with you?
The first one that you said, I can't recall the name now, but that sounded a bit like me, that I could just be looking around in my environment and start laughing randomly because I see something funny or that I perceive as funny. Yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so what we do in these programs is, well, one, people can take the quiz to kind of understand, but we're very intentional that they're personas. Because as you're listening to some of these, you might say, oh, with this group of friends, I'm a curator. When I'm by myself, I'm the enthusiast, because I'm constantly looking around like, oh, that's funny, that's interesting. When I'm at work and I have to give a presentation, I sometimes become a little bit of that entertainer. So the goal is that you learn each of these different personas and can use them at different times. But for someone that just wanted more levity, more humor, more joy in their life, we would do this as a program, and essentially we do a deep dive into each one of those personas. And someone that just wants more levity in life, we'd probably spend a lot of time on the enthusiast, because that is very much about how do we find more joy and appreciation of the things that happen to us. And there's some great techniques that we can do to do that, which we can talk about if we want. But it's to say, okay, but then there's also curator, or then there's also this skill set. There's also this skill set. And now, because you can switch between all of these, you're going to have a lot more humor, because maybe it's not appropriate to be an enthusiast at this point. It's much better to be an advocate.